The champagne glasses clinked with a sound that could have bought a small house. Marcus Wellington stood at the head of his marble dining table, his 3 wives seated to his left, each dripping in diamonds that caught the chandelier light like tiny galaxies. To his right, barely visible in her simple black uniform, stood Rosa, the maid who had been with the family for 15 years. What happened next would change everything, but let me take you back to understand how we got here, to this moment where a billionaire would make the most unexpected decision of his life. Marcus Wellington wasn't born into wealth. He clawed his way up from nothing, building a tech empire that revolutionized online payment systems. By 55, he had accumulated a fortune worth $200 million, 3 wives in a polygamous arrangement that raised eyebrows in high society, and a reputation for being as ruthless in business as he was generous with those who earned his respect. His first wife, Victoria, was a former supermodel who had graced the covers of every major fashion magazine in the 90s. She was elegant, calculating, and had a taste for luxury that could drain a bank account faster than a cyber attack. His second wife, Anastasia, was a Russian pianist who had won international competitions before catching Marcus's eye at a charity gala. She was beautiful, talented, and had the emotional depth of a puddle when it came to anyone's problems but her own. His third wife, Jade, was 20 years younger than Marcus, an influencer who had built her brand on lifestyle content and married into the Wellington fortune just 3 years ago. She documented every moment of her luxurious life online, turning their private existence into public spectacle. Rosa had watched it all unfold from the shadows. She had been there when Victoria moved in, helped Anastasia settle into the East Wing, and cleaned up after Jade's elaborate photo shoots. She never complained, never gossiped, just worked quietly, efficiently, almost invisibly. She sent most of her salary back to her family in Colombia, where her mother needed medical care and her younger siblings needed education. Rosa lived in a small room on the 3rd floor, ate simple meals in the kitchen after everyone else had finished, and found joy in the small things: a well-made bed, a perfectly cleaned window, the smell of fresh flowers she arranged throughout the house. The mansion itself was a monument to excess. 32 rooms sprawled across 10 acres of perfectly manicured grounds. The garage housed a collection of luxury vehicles that included Rolls-Royces, Ferraris, Bentleys, and Lamborghinis. Each wife had her favorite. Victoria drove a pearl-white Rolls-Royce Phantom that cost more than most people would earn in a lifetime. Anastasia preferred her midnight blue Bentley Continental, which she claimed matched her sophisticated taste. Jade had insisted on a bright red Lamborghini Aventador, perfect for her Instagram posts and weekend drives down the coast. These cars weren't just transportation, they were extensions of their identities, symbols of their status, proof of their position in Marcus's life. But Marcus had been feeling something gnawing at him lately. Maybe it was age, maybe it was the emptiness he felt despite being surrounded by beauty and luxury, or maybe it was the conversation he had overheard last Thursday. He had been walking past the kitchen, invisible in his own way, when he heard his wives talking. Victoria was complaining about the new Hermes bag she wanted being on backorder. Anastasia was upset that Marcus had suggested she take a commercial flight to her concert in Vienna instead of the private jet. Jade was lamenting that her latest brand deal had fallen through, which meant she might have to, horror of horrors, actually budget for her next designer shopping spree. Then Rosa had entered, quietly asking if they needed anything. They had barely acknowledged her, treating her like part of the furniture. The contrast was so stark it hit Marcus like a physical blow. That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He stood in his study, looking out at the city lights below, thinking about value, about character, about what really mattered. He had built his empire on understanding people, on predicting behavior, on seeing potential where others saw nothing. He had made his fortune by taking calculated risks. And now, he was going to take the biggest risk of his personal life. He was going to run an experiment, a test that would reveal the true nature of the people closest to him. The idea formed slowly, then all at once, crystal clear and perfect in its simplicity. The next morning, Marcus called a family meeting. This wasn't unusual. he often gathered everyone to discuss household matters, upcoming trips, or business decisions that affected them all. The wives assembled in the formal living room, each positioned on antique furniture like queens holding court. Rosa was summoned too, which was unusual. She stood near the doorway, hands clasped, wondering if she had done something wrong. Marcus looked at each of them, these four women who represented such different aspects of his life, and began to speak. He told them he had been thinking about legacy, about what he would leave behind when he was gone. He was getting older, he said, and while he was in good health, he wanted to make arrangements. He explained that he had always valued humility, sacrifice, and genuine character, qualities that had been lost in the pursuit of wealth. Then he announced the challenge. For the next 30 days, he wanted each of them, including Rosa, to give up something they valued deeply. For his 3 wives, the challenge was clear: give up your luxury car. Drive something ordinary, something affordable, something that wouldn't turn heads or make statements. For Rosa, the challenge was different: accept the use of one of those luxury cars for the month. Experience what it felt like to have something extravagant, something beyond necessity. The room exploded in protests. Victoria stood up, her face flushed with anger. She couldn't possibly be seen in a regular car, her reputation would be destroyed. Anastasia's objections were more refined but equally adamant: she had concerts, appearances, a certain image to maintain. Jade was already on her phone, probably calculating how this would affect her social media engagement. Marcus held up his hand for silence. This wasn't optional, he explained. This was a condition he was setting, and at the end of the 30 days, he would make a decision about his estate based on what he observed. The person who showed the most growth, the most adaptability, the most genuine character would receive the bulk of his fortune when he passed. $200 million hung in the balance. Rosa tried to refuse. She didn't need a luxury car. She barely drove anywhere except to the market once a week in the old Honda Civic Marcus had bought for staff errands. But Marcus insisted. This was about understanding different perspectives, about walking in each other's shoes. Finally, reluctantly, they all agreed. What choice did they have? Victoria, Anastasia, and Jade each loved Marcus in their own way, but they also loved the life he provided. And $200 million was worth a month of discomfort. Rosa agreed because Marcus asked her to, because she respected him, because she didn't feel she had the right to refuse. The transformation began the next day. Marcus had 3 ordinary cars delivered: a used Toyota Camry for Victoria, a modest Honda Accord for Anastasia, and a basic Ford Focus for Jade. Each wife stood in the driveway, staring at their temporary vehicles with expressions of pure horror. Rosa was given the keys to Victoria's Rolls-Royce Phantom. She held them like they might burn her, unsure what to do, how to even approach such an expensive machine. The first week was chaos. Victoria refused to be seen driving the Camry and hired a driver, which technically violated the spirit of the challenge. Marcus caught her and reminded her that the point was to experience life differently, not to find loopholes. Anastasia drove her Honda to a concert hall for rehearsal and parked so far from the entrance that she nearly missed her practice time, too embarrassed to let anyone see her arrival. Jade's entire social media presence shifted. She stopped posting car content and focused on indoor shots, carefully cropping out any evidence of her reduced circumstances. Rosa, meanwhile, was terrified of the Rolls-Royce. The first time she drove it to the market, she parked in the farthest spot in the lot, checked it 17 times to make sure it was locked, and hurried through her shopping convinced someone would steal it or she would return to find it damaged. People stared at her, this small woman in simple clothes emerging from such an opulent vehicle. Some looked impressed, others confused, a few openly hostile, assuming she was putting on airs above her station. She hated the attention. She hated feeling like she was pretending to be something she wasn't. She drove home 5 miles under the speed limit, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, and parked it in the garage with a sigh of relief. But Marcus was watching everything. He saw Victoria's driver scheme and her subsequent sullen compliance when he shut it down. He saw Anastasia's Instagram stories complaining about roughing it and experiencing life from a different perspective, with hashtags that made it clear she thought she was slumming. He saw Jade's engagement numbers drop and her increasing anxiety about maintaining relevance. And he saw Rosa, who after that first terrifying trip to the market, had quietly asked him if she could use the Rolls-Royce for something else. She wanted to take her mother, who was visiting from Colombia, to see the ocean. Her mother had never seen the Pacific, had never ridden in anything fancier than a city bus, and Rosa thought it might be a beautiful memory for her. Marcus agreed immediately, touched by the request. The second week brought subtle shifts. Victoria, forced to drive herself in the Camry, began to notice things she never had before. She stopped at a gas station and had to figure out how to pump gas herself for the first time in decades. A woman at the next pump saw her struggling and helped her, chatting about her own life, her kids, her job at the hospital. Victoria found herself actually listening, actually engaging in a way she hadn't in years. The conversation lasted maybe 10 minutes, but it stuck with her. She realized how isolated she had become in her bubble of wealth. Anastasia's Honda broke down on the way to a recital. Not seriously, just a flat tire, but she didn't know how to change it and her phone had died. A mechanic from a nearby shop saw her on the side of the road and stopped to help. He refused payment, said he was just being neighborly, and told her about his daughter who played piano and dreamed of being a musician. Anastasia ended up giving the daughter a free lesson the following week, something she never would have done in her previous life. It felt good to teach someone who was truly passionate, truly hungry for knowledge, rather than the privileged students who took her skill for granted. Jade's experience was different. Without the luxury car content, her follower engagement dropped significantly. Brands stopped reaching out. She found herself with time she usually filled with photo shoots and sponsorship obligations. One afternoon, she volunteered at a local community center, thinking she might create content around giving back. But the cameras stayed off when she met a group of teenage girls who were learning about social media literacy. They asked her real questions, hard questions, about the pressure of online presence, about authenticity, about whether her life was really as perfect as it looked. Jade found herself being honest for the first time in years. She told them about the anxiety, the constant comparison, the emptiness of validation that came from strangers. The girls listened, and Jade realized she had been so busy creating a persona that she had lost herself in the process. Rosa's experience with the Rolls-Royce was transforming her too, but in unexpected ways. After taking her mother to the ocean, a trip that had brought tears to both their eyes, Rosa began to see the car differently. Not as a symbol of excess, but as a tool that could create experiences. She started using it to help people. She drove an elderly neighbor to medical appointments, the comfortable seats and smooth ride making the journey easier for someone with chronic pain. She picked up her nephew from school in it once, and his face lit up like Christmas morning. He showed all his friends, bragged about his aunt, stood a little taller. She realized that wealth itself wasn't evil, it was how you used it that mattered. The car could be a status symbol, or it could be a way to bring joy and assistance to others. By the third week, Marcus was seeing clear patterns. Victoria had started dressing down, wearing less jewelry, spending more time in conversation with the staff rather than just issuing orders. She asked Rosa about her family, really asked, and listened to the answers. She donated several of her expensive bags to a charity auction without being asked. Anastasia had begun teaching free piano lessons to underprivileged children twice a week. She spoke about it at dinner with genuine enthusiasm, describing the talent she was discovering, the potential being wasted because of lack of access to education. Jade had drastically reduced her social media presence. She posted maybe once every few days, and the content was more thoughtful, more real. She talked about mental health, about the dangers of comparison culture, about finding value beyond validation, but the wives were also watching Rosa, and what they saw made them uncomfortable. Rosa, who had always been virtually invisible to them, was flourishing in a quiet way. She carried herself with a little more confidence. She smiled more. The staff, who had always respected her, now seemed to genuinely love her. She had used the opportunity of the challenge not to elevate herself but to elevate others. She hadn't posted about it on social media, hadn't bragged, hadn't made a show of her kindness. She just did it, because that was who she was. The fourth week arrived, and Marcus announced that the final test was approaching. On the last day of the challenge, they would all gather for dinner, and he would reveal his decision. The tension in the house was palpable. The wives, who had made genuine progress in their own ways, were still competing. They had changed, but was it deep change or surface adaptation? They were kind to Rosa now, but was it genuine or strategic? They had shown humility, but would it last beyond the challenge? These questions haunted Marcus as he prepared for the final evening. On the morning of the last day, something unexpected happened. Rosa came to Marcus's study and asked to speak with him privately. She looked nervous, her hands twisting together as she stood before his desk. She told him that she appreciated everything he had done, the opportunity to experience something she never could have otherwise, but that she wanted to withdraw from the challenge. She didn't feel right being in competition with his wives for his fortune. She was just the maid, she said. She hadn't earned the right to be considered alongside the women he had married, the women he had chosen to share his life with. It wouldn't be appropriate, she said. It wouldn't be right. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. This woman who had served his family for 15 years with no expectation of reward beyond her modest salary. This woman who, when given luxury, had used it to serve others. This woman who, even now, when $200 million hung in the balance, was concerned about what was appropriate, what was right. He asked her why she had used the Rolls-Royce the way she had. Rosa explained simply that she had so little, and the car was so much, that it felt wrong to use it just for herself. If she was going to have something extravagant temporarily, she wanted to share it, to make it mean something beyond just her own experience. She talked about her mother's tears at seeing the ocean, about her neighbor's relief at comfortable transportation to painful medical treatments, about her nephew's pride. She didn't see it as charity or kindness, she saw it as the obvious thing to do when you had more than you needed. Marcus dismissed her gently, telling her to think about it until dinner. He didn't try to convince her to stay in the challenge. He simply thanked her for her honesty. After she left, Marcus sat in his study for a long time, thinking about everything he had observed over the past month. His wives had grown. They had learned lessons. They had become better versions of themselves. But Rosa had simply been herself, and that self was extraordinary in its ordinariness. She possessed something that couldn't be taught, bought, or learned through a challenge. She possessed genuine goodness, the kind that existed whether anyone was watching or not, whether there was reward or not, whether it was convenient or not. That evening, as the sun set over the estate, 6 people gathered around the marble dining table. Marcus stood at the head, his 3 wives to his left, Rosa to his right. The champagne was poured. The moment had arrived. Marcus looked at each of his wives in turn. He acknowledged their growth. Victoria had rediscovered empathy and connection. Anastasia had found purpose in giving back. Jade had learned the emptiness of external validation and was seeking authentic meaning. He was proud of them, he said. They had risen to the challenge in ways that surprised and pleased him. They would each be well provided for in his will, he assured them. They would never want for anything. Then he turned to Rosa. She looked terrified, uncomfortable, like she wanted to disappear into the wallpaper. Marcus told the story of what he had observed. Not just the use of the car for others, but 15 years of quiet service. The time she had stayed late when someone was sick, asking for no extra pay. The way she always remembered everyone's preferences, anticipated needs before they were spoken, created a home rather than just maintaining a house. The time she had found Victoria crying after a failed business venture and simply sat with her, saying nothing, just being present. The way she had taught Anastasia basic cooking skills when the pianist wanted to prepare a special meal for Marcus's birthday. The countless small kindnesses that had gone unnoticed, unacknowledged, unrewarded. Marcus explained his philosophy. Wealth, he had learned, was a test of character. Most people failed it. Wealth made you forget where you came from, made you isolated, made you believe you were fundamentally different from those with less. Poverty was also a test of character. It could make you bitter, resentful, desperate. But some people, rare people, passed both tests. They remained kind when they had nothing. They remained humble when they had everything. They measured success not by what they accumulated but by what they gave. They found joy in service, purpose in helping others, meaning in connection rather than possession. Then Marcus made his announcement. Rosa would inherit the bulk of his estate. $200 million would go to a woman who had never asked for anything beyond a fair wage and the ability to help her family. His wives would each receive enough to live comfortably, to pursue their passions, to never worry about money. But the fortune, the real fortune, would go to someone who had proven she knew what to do with it. Not through the challenge, but through a lifetime of choices that revealed her character. The room was silent. Victoria's face showed shock, then something that looked like understanding. Anastasia's expression moved through surprise to a kind of resigned acceptance. Jade looked stunned, but not angry, more contemplative than upset. Rosa, however, looked like she might faint. She started to protest, to say she couldn't accept, that it was too much, that it wasn't right. But Marcus held up his hand. He told her that she had a choice, of course. She could refuse. He wouldn't force wealth upon her. But he asked her to consider what she could do with that money. Not for herself, though she deserved to live comfortably. But for her family, her community, all the people she cared about. She could fund scholarships, build medical clinics, create opportunities for people just like her who worked hard but never got ahead because circumstances were stacked against them. She could change lives, not just her own but thousands of lives. And he knew, he absolutely knew, that she would use the money wisely, humbly, in ways that would make the world genuinely better. Rosa's eyes filled with tears. She looked at the three wives, expecting resentment, anger, hatred. Instead, Victoria stood up, walked around the table, and hugged her. She whispered something in Rosa's ear that no one else heard, but it made Rosa cry harder. Anastasia followed, then Jade. The four women stood there, an unlikely circle, bound together by this strange, transformative month. They had all learned something. They had all changed. But Rosa had taught them the most important lesson, that character wasn't something you performed for a challenge or developed for a reward. It was who you were when no one was watching, when nothing was at stake, when kindness cost you something and you gave it anyway. Marcus watched this scene with satisfaction. He had gambled his fortune on an experiment in human nature, and the results had exceeded his expectations. His wives weren't angry because, in the end, they recognized the truth of his decision. The challenge had forced them to see what had always been there, hidden in plain sight. Rosa's worth wasn't determined by her position or her salary or her lack of pedigree. It was intrinsic, undeniable, earned through years of consistent goodness that expected nothing in return. The dinner that followed was unlike any meal that had been shared in that house before. The conversation was real, deep, free of pretense. Victoria talked about starting a foundation to help women rebuild their lives after divorce or financial hardship. Anastasia was planning a music school for underprivileged children. Jade wanted to create content that actually helped young people navigate the pressures of social media rather than adding to them. And Rosa, overwhelmed and still processing, talked quietly about her mother's medical needs, her siblings' education, maybe a small house in Colombia where her family could live without constantly worrying about money. Marcus listened to all of it, knowing he had made the right choice. The next morning, the luxury cars were returned to their original owners. Rosa gave back the Rolls-Royce keys with something like relief. She was glad for the experience, she told Marcus, but she preferred her simple life. Though maybe, she admitted with a shy smile, she might accept a slightly nicer car than the old Honda. Something safe and reliable, but not ostentatious. Marcus laughed and agreed. Victoria, Anastasia, and Jade reclaimed their vehicles, but something had shifted. They drove them less frequently, used them more consciously. The cars were no longer their identities, just tools, beautiful tools, but tools nonetheless. Months passed. The legal documents were signed, the trust established. Rosa still worked in the house, refusing to quit despite Marcus's insistence that she didn't need to. She liked the work, she said. She liked the family. She liked feeling useful. But her life had expanded in ways she couldn't have imagined. Her mother got the medical treatment she needed. Her siblings went to university. She funded a community center in her hometown in Colombia, with resources for education, healthcare, and job training. She set up scholarship funds. She helped families in crisis. She did it all quietly, without fanfare, without recognition. Just like she had done everything else in her life. Marcus watched it all with deep satisfaction. His wives had become his friends, his true partners in ways they hadn't been before. The challenge had stripped away the superficial and revealed what was real. They spent evenings talking about philosophy, about meaning, about legacy. They worked together on charitable projects. They had become a family in the truest sense, bound not by transactions or status but by genuine respect and affection. 2 years after the challenge, Marcus threw a party. Not for himself, but to celebrate the opening of Rosa's community center in Colombia. He flew everyone down, his wives, the household staff, even some of the people Rosa had helped during that month with the Rolls-Royce. The center was beautiful, functional, filled with hope and possibility. Rosa gave a short speech, thanking Marcus but mostly talking about the people who would benefit, the lives that would change, the opportunities that were now possible. Victoria leaned over to Marcus during the celebration and said something he would never forget. She told him that the challenge had saved her life. Not literally, but spiritually. She had been drowning in luxury, suffocating in privilege, lost in a life that looked perfect but felt empty. The month in the Camry, the experience of being ordinary, had reminded her that she was human. That connection mattered more than status. That giving was more satisfying than receiving. That purpose was more valuable than possessions. She thanked him for being brave enough to risk his fortune, his relationships, everything, to teach them what really mattered. Marcus looked around at the celebration, at the people whose lives were being changed by Rosa's kindness and his resources. He thought about his business empire, the millions he had made, the power he had accumulated. None of it meant as much as this moment. None of it had given him the satisfaction he felt watching Rosa, the former maid, the woman who had spent 15 years invisible in his home, now changing the world in quiet, profound ways. The champagne glasses clinked again, but this time it sounded different. Not like excess, but like celebration. Not like transaction, but like genuine joy. Marcus Wellington had set out to test character, to see who among the people closest to him truly understood what mattered. He had challenged 3 wives to give up their luxury cars, expecting maybe to see which one handled the sacrifice with the most grace. What he hadn't expected was that the winner of his fortune would be the person who had never wanted it, never sought it, never imagined it could be hers. Rosa had won not by competing but by simply being who she had always been, kind, humble, generous, and good. And in the end, that had made all the difference. The $200 million didn't change Rosa, it amplified her. It gave her the resources to do what she had always done, just on a larger scale. She helped people. She created opportunities. She made the world better in small, consistent, meaningful ways. Marcus had spent his life building an empire. Rosa was spending hers building something far more valuable: community, connection, hope. That was the legacy that would endure, long after the luxury cars had rusted and the mansion had crumbled. That was the wealth that truly mattered, the fortune that could never be lost or stolen or taxed away. It was the fortune of a life well lived, of character tested and proven, of goodness that required no audience, no reward, no recognition. Marcus Wellington died peacefully 7 years after the challenge, surrounded by family. His wives mourned him genuinely, their tears real, their grief deep. They had loved him, truly loved him, in the end. Rosa mourned him too, this man who had seen her when she was invisible, who had valued her when she was overlooked, who had entrusted her with resources that changed thousands of lives. At his funeral, each of the 4 women spoke. They told stories not of his wealth or success, but of his wisdom, his courage to ask hard questions, his belief that people could change and grow. The fortune Rosa inherited continued to do good long after both she and Marcus were gone. It funded schools, hospitals, community centers across Colombia and beyond. It provided scholarships to people who reminded Rosa of herself, hardworking, honest, deserving of opportunities that circumstances had denied them. The Wellington Foundation, as it came to be known, became synonymous with quiet, effective charity that changed lives without seeking credit. And sometimes, late at night, when Rosa was old and gray, she would think back to that month when she drove a Rolls-Royce. She would remember the terror and discomfort, but also the joy of taking her mother to see the ocean, the satisfaction of helping her neighbor, the pride on her nephew's face. She would think about the challenge that had changed everything, the test she had passed without even knowing she was being tested. She would remember the moment Marcus had announced his decision, the shock and fear and overwhelming responsibility of inheriting a fortune. But mostly, she would remember what she had learned, that wealth was a tool, character was a choice, and kindness was its own reward. The luxury car hadn't made her better or happier. It had simply revealed what was already there, magnified her existing nature, given her the means to be more fully herself. And herself, it turned out, was someone worth being. Someone who proved that the person you are when you have nothing is exactly who you'll be when you have everything. Someone who showed that true wealth isn't measured in dollars or possessions, but in lives touched, people helped, and love shared freely without expectation of return. That was the story of how a billionaire challenged 3 wives to give up their luxury cars, and the maid won his $200 million fortune. But more than that, it was the story of how 4 women discovered who they really were, how one man found the courage to value character over convention, and how the least likely person proved to be the most worthy. It was a story about what matters, what endures, and what makes a life truly rich. And it all started with a simple challenge, a month-long test, and a question that changed everything. What would you do if wealth was suddenly yours, and what does your answer reveal about who you really are?